Welcome back to The Wandering Naturalist. My name is Brandon, he, him.
And this is Angela, she, her.
And last time we talked to Hardy Kern from the American Bird Conservancy about how neonicotinoids are impacting the food web that the birds rely on for survival. Today, we're talking to Dr. Bill Arnold from the University of Minnesota about his research on neonics' presence in freshwater. So, welcome, Dr. Arnold. Can you tell us about yourself?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm a professor in civil, environmental, and geoengineering at the University of Minnesota. And my team conducts research on various chemical pollutants, including solvents, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and more recently, the poly and perfluoroalkyl substances that we all know as PFAS.
Ooh, fun.
And I started off looking at how these chemicals degrade in environmental systems to develop treatment systems and figure out how long they persist in the environment. And over time, my work's evolved to measure the presence of contaminants and their degradation products in lakes, rivers, and groundwater.
Why did you start studying neonicotinoids and their presence and persistence in freshwater as part of this huge block of things that you're studying?
We started looking at the neonicotinoids about 10 years ago because we were interested in how persistent they were in water and what different processes might be degrading them, and whether or not those reaction products might still be toxic to insects. That was our major focus. And then we learned that they were actually rather persistent in water and that maybe we ought to be looking for the levels of the contaminants in the environment rather than how fast they degraded.
So it sounds like it has a long persistence then in water. Did you find significant amounts of neonicotinoids in water as you started testing for that?
We did. So, the first thing we learned is that when they're just in water, they tend to stay there, right? They don't degrade very quickly. And the other thing we looked at is whether or not they react with sunlight. And we found that that did degrade them over time, but not all water is exposed to sunlight. And so when we looked in rivers and streams and groundwater, we found them pretty much everywhere we looked. It didn't matter whether it was an agricultural area or an urban area. We found them in both places.
Hmm.
And that led to us then investigating an even wider set of waters across the state of Minnesota.
How long does it tend to be persistent? Were you able to discover that?
This is a good question. The persistence really depends on where they are.
Okay.
And so if they stay in soil, there are pathways by which they will biodegrade. But as Hardy Kern and Dr. Roy said before, they tend to move around in the environment, right? And so if they don't stay in the soil and the soil drains well or the land is tile drained, they move rather quickly into the surface water or the groundwater. And then you lose the access to the microbiology and the bacteria that degrade them. And so then they'll tend to persist. And so we found that for it just in water, the persistence is months if there's no exposure to sunlight. And if you have a water that's exposed to sunlight, it might be a few days. The problem is that not all of our water is exposed to sunlight. So it's only that surface layer of a river or a stream or a lake that's exposed to sunlight. And so unless the water is well mixed, you'll have, even if it's degrading at the surface, there's lots of other parts of that water body the compound won't degrade in.
We talked a lot about how they travel a lot in earlier episodes. Is it because they make the neonics water soluble so the seed will absorb it as it starts to germinate? Does that just make it a lot easier for it to enter our water bodies?
Yeah, the solubility is a huge reason why we have so much of the neonicotinoids in water. It is because they dissolve, right? And that's the key for anything that's going to transport in water. And the other aspect of this is that we apply them consistently, right? And so even if they do degrade in the soil or by light, they have this pseudo persistence because they can constantly be applied, constantly leach out, and constantly be released. And so we'll find them regularly.
Is this true with like other insecticides, or is it, again, it kind of seems like the underlying message has been that these neonics are so good at it that they're kind of the top one of really packing that punch.
Yeah, and so you're getting into the aspects of the physical chemical properties of different chemicals, right? And you have to look at really the details of their chemical structure to figure this out. And neonicotinoids are one of these chemicals that are designed to be relatively water soluble, particularly because, as Hardy Kern and Dr. Roy said, they're designed to be in the water long enough that the plants can then take them up through that evapotranspiration process. Whereas other pesticides are designed to, let's say, be on the surface of the plant and stay there for a bug to eat. Or if it's a herbicide, for example, it might be to kill the function in some way of the plant. And depending on how it's taken up and how it's used, it depends on whether you want it to stick to the soil or stick to the plant or dissolve in water. And all of those things can be designed by tweaking the chemical structure.
Yeah, I did not do so great in chemistry, so we'll kind of like layman terms that. But it does have me, because this is something I've noticed. Like, there is a lot of talk about chemicals in the environment, and I feel like one reason I wanted to do a neonic specific one is because a lot of people kind of seem to lump them all together almost and not understand that there are very different classes, like a pesticide, insecticide, fungicide, herbicide are all very different. So I'm kind of curious if it sounds like you've looked at a lot of different things, plastics, other things. Is there one are they like kind of in all the waterways, or is this neonic kind of the one that's really showcasing that it's across all of them compared to other ones?
As the analytical chemistry has gotten better, we have found that you can find almost any chemical in some environmental compartment. Right. And it's going to be how much of it is there. It's based on how much it's used, where it's applied, whether it's coming from wastewater, right? Whether it's a pharmaceutical that we use, whether it's given to animals, whether it's applied to crops, whether it's applied to people's yards, how it's used, where it comes from. But if we have a chemical in commerce, we can likely find it in the environment. And neonicotinoids are one of the big ones just because of how much we use and because of their water solubility. They're relatively easy to detect.
So if we can find almost any chemical we use in the water, why was it important to know if neonicotinoids were present and how long they're present in the water?
For neonicotinoids, there are lots of questions, right? And so, as Hardy Kern said, they affect the insects, right? And insects are really important in our ecosystem, even if we may not like them very much. Right?
I love them.
And so, if there are non-target effects of these chemicals, that's really important to know, right? Insects breed in water, and fish and amphibians live in water. And if we're affecting them in some way, that has larger scope impacts on our environmental health. And we can do something about that if we know what chemicals are causing it. And the other aspect of this too is that it leads to human exposure as well, right? So are these chemicals in water sources that become our drinking water? And if so, we want to make sure that our drinking water treatment strategies are removing them and that any levels that we're exposed to aren't problematic. And also, if we're swimming and fishing in the water as well, that's another route that we can be exposed.
Yeah, it kind of made me take a second look at the water in my Nalgene right before I took a sip. Like, huh,
I will say
in here.
Our drinking water treatment in Minnesota is really good, and they should not be in there.
Yes, yeah. Minnesota is pretty amazing. Through your research, do you think there's any solutions to reduce neonicotinoids entering water bodies and groundwater?
So reducing the amount that gets into water is really difficult unless we change how we use it. And obviously, on a personal level, you can look at the products and the labels and change your purchasing habits. We need to think about how products are marketed in agriculture and whether or not they're needed. That would be another change. And then in terms of like water treatment itself, we have the technologies to make sure they're not getting into our drinking water. But on a wide scale environmental thing, that's really difficult unless we change use practices.
Is there anything else you'd want our listeners to know about your research?
Definitely, people have a lot of power with respect to, or more power than they think with respect to chemical usage, because what we buy matters. And if we tell retailers what we want and what we don't want in our products, that will make a difference. Definitely read labels as to what you're purchasing. And so the internet is a powerful place to learn about different chemicals. You can look up any chemical name and learn about it. And of course, it's the internet, so be careful make sure your sources are good.
Look for .govs.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you, again, it seems like there's always more questions. That's how research works. We do something, we learn something, we have more curiosity and more, questions and answers. So is there any kind of new research that you're really excited about to perhaps highlight, whether that's with the neonics or just other things in the water?
Absolutely. So I think we're doing two things I'm really excited about. One is we've been looking at quaternary ammonium compounds, and these are the disinfectants that we were all using during the pandemic.
Oh boy.
And so we've been investigating how much of those are going into wastewater treatment plants and how much are coming out, and how persistent those are in the environment, because obviously they're designed to kill bacteria, so there's potential resistance issues there. And the other thing we've been looking at is we've heard a lot about the PFAS, right? The poly and perfluoroalkyl substances. But there are lots and lots of other fluorinated chemicals out there, including a lot of insecticides, herbicides, pharmaceuticals. And so we've been trying to track whether or not these other fluorinated chemicals that we're using are getting out into the environment, and whether they're transforming into other fluorinated chemicals that we don't even know what they are yet.
And I always think of the compounding factor that even if you can detect one and study its effects, they're all like mingling together at different levels, and who knows what that effect is on
Yeah,
wildlife and ourselves.
mixture effects are really hard on multiple levels, right? We don't know what the cocktail of chemicals that, let's say, aquatic wildlife is exposed to does. And it's, if you take certain ingredients in certain ratios, it's going to do one thing, and different ratios will do something else. And from the other aspect too, the treatment of these chemical mixtures is really complicated, whether it's in drinking water or groundwater. The more diverse the chemical structures, the more complicated the treatment might have to be.
Yeah, it's technology solves a lot of problems. We found a lot of uses for these things, but then it ends up causing other problems that we didn't intend and weren't aware of.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for listeners who want to enter the scientific field?
I think the first one is be curious, right? If you want to learn more and you want to know how things work, go and investigate and try and learn. Uh, Study your math and science is what the trivial answer, but the other one is really read and learn how to write and communicate, because a lot of science is trying to explain what you're doing to other people. And if you can't write the reports that need to be done or communicate that science to the policymakers that are going to make the changes that need to be done, and if you can't communicate that effectively, your science won't have impact.
Absolutely. I think that I feel like I've really seen scientists work in the past 10 or 20 years on improving their communication. And I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and it's not what we're trained to do, and oftentimes scientists aren't people who want to do that, right?
Yeah, they don't want to
So
be on social media, Instagram and such, making all of this relevant and interesting in a method, in like a storytelling way. That's hard.
yeah, and the scientists that can do that well have a lot of power.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today and sharing your research with us. I really, really appreciate it. It was really fascinating.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Well, Angela, what do you think? Have you learned more about neonicotinoids?
I mean, yeah, I feel like this is something I've, ever since seeing Charlotte's talk and it's in the news, it's all over. It becomes such a hot topic and a question I think a lot of people have. And I'm glad to be able to shed more light on it because I think there is a lot of confusion. I'm glad to see people really concerned about chemicals. But again, these are technologies that really do make affordable food and like when it comes to a lot of our land management, like herbicides and pesticides, like some of these things are one of those tools that we need to utilize, but always taking that pause to question ourselves and be curious on, is this the best solution? Are there other ways? How are they impacting each other? I think it's great to see people curious about it. So I'm really hoping that our guests shed some more light on that for our listeners, and they too can think of things that they can do.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think that the really easy solution, the simple solution is like, well, let's just not use it. And honestly, we have a partnership with two high schools where they come to Eastman Nature Center every other week. It's a D&D club. They learn about environmental issues, come up with solutions, and their solution is always when we talk about this particular topic, we're just going to stop using it. But that doesn't really work, unfortunately. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's really concerning, but it's also not really surprising because we produce enough food to feed over 8 billion people. I mean, that's amazing. 8 billion people is a lot of people on the planet. And with modern farming techniques, herbicides, pesticides like neonics, we could feed all of them. It's an unprecedented thing that we can do that we've never been able to do before in history, but it's also why these pesticides cause so many problems. Really, the negative environmental effects of them are a symptom of trying to feed that many people. I think that we need to be aware that it is a technology and it solves one problem. When we first started using them, the problem was, well, it can kill our pests really easily, but it's not going to be as toxic as other pesticides were for vertebrates. We're finding out that, well, with exposure to seed spills and whatnot, it actually does have an impact. And so it has been banned in some places. The EU has banned it, but they're still having environmental impacts from the other pesticides they're using. And so I think we also need to be aware as we go through that there is no technological solution that fixes something completely. It's really easy. It's really tempting to look for that silver bullet. This one thing is going to fix it and we're good to go. I think cars are a great example of that. When cars were first adopted, they were hailed as a solution to the overwhelming pollution problem of horse scat in cities, which was just awful. And cars definitely fixed that problem.
Yeah, if we were all having horses right now, that would probably not be pretty for many things.
Now the different problem is that they release so much CO2 and have such a huge impact on climate change. So now we have electric vehicles, which greatly reduce CO2 emissions, but their need for batteries increases the need for mining metals, which has its own impacts, its own problems. And I drive an electric vehicle. I really do think it's better for the earth than using a gas vehicle, but it still has an impact. And it's going to have a different impact than the problem that it solved. And so I think that what I've really gotten out of this is that neonicotinoids solved a pollution problem when they first came out. But as we've done new science and new research, we've learned it has an impact. We've learned what that unintended consequence that all technology has is for this particular technology. And now we need to think about how do we address that? And do we address it by getting rid of it completely? Do we address it by making it more a part of integrated pest management and using it selectively? Do we find a new technology to replace it completely? And then what is that unintended consequence for that technology going to be? And I think that's really the key is we need to be scientific in these things. Realize that we start with our initial assessment of how it is and realize that we're going to learn more as it goes and we're going to need to mitigate some of those changes as we go along. So I'm really curious to see what the future of neonicotinoids are, how we mitigate the problems it's causing, and what we end up replacing it with.
It's a lot of opportunity for innovative solutions. I think that's the exciting part, especially with all our guests sharing the things that our listeners can do at home. They can be small, simple steps, but also just having that curiosity to you yourself. Pursue maybe a career in this. It's really showing that we have a lot of work to do to understand these things. So having someone that does storytelling, research, lobbying, whatever, like there is such a big wide range of niches that people can find to excel with their skills to help us solve these complex environmental issues. So I always want to leave on that hopeful note, right? Like there's a lot of room here for us to continue to learn and do better together for future generations.
Absolutely. And we're going to do it in small steps. And we're going to find more issues that come up and we're going to fix those issues. But I think we're never going to find the perfect solution. It's going to be a long journey of small improvements, which, like you said, it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that things work out. Thanks to Dr. Charlotte Roy, Hardy Kern, and Dr. Bill Arnold for helping us learn about neonicotinoids today. If you want to learn more about neonicotinoids, go to our Facebook page or Instagram, the Wandering Naturalist Podcast of Three Rivers Park District, and type in the series title, Toxic Trails of Neonicotinoids. There's always more to discuss, and we just never have enough time to get everything covered.
You can also give us feedback, ask questions, see what events Brandon and I might be doing in person so you can come and wander with us. You can always email us at wanderingnaturalist@threeriversparks.org. Please leave us a review and share with your friends where you download our podcast from. Your reviews and shares help our podcast reach more people.
A special thanks to Tom Nisley for arranging interviews and Monica Rauschwater for guest outreach. Thanks to Emily Thompson for guest support, and a shout out to our amazing social media team for posting on Facebook and Instagram and adding all of those extra resources. We hope you enjoyed learning with us today. Now that you know, what will you do in your wanderings?